Hello and welcome to episode number 75 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. We are now 3/4 of a century into making these things, and let it be known that we have heard your calls. So after last episode, we had a lot of feedback, and so we've taken that to heart, Neelan and I, and our new host. We love Kellen. We have no ill will towards Kellen, but the people have spoken, and so Kellen will be no more, and we have the one and only Paula Deming as a permanent co-host.
The Orchid Tank steps up.
Yep. Nice to see you, Paula.
Yeah, how's it going?
Hello. Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about it.
That's cool.
First, I feel like I have to give a shout out to Mark the Green Tank and Neelan the Orange Tank.
This is already going better than any episode we've done so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a much more synergy with the three of us. Out with the red, in with the
Orchid Tank.
Perfect.
What the is going on here? You didn't tell me we were recording tonight?
God damn it.
What the is she doing here?
Kellen is pointing to an empty chair because I was hoping to edit Paula in. I was hoping we had enough stuff from last week that I could, from now on, just use Paula's 15 minutes of actual talk last week to carry us through for the rest of the podcast. I could just edit.
Splice it together in different ways.
Don't they have those talking keyboards now?
Yeah,
where
like
you
a
can
soundboard.
Yeah,
A Paula
exactly.
soundboard.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
can easily replace Kellen with a Paula soundboard.
Well, not even a soundboard, but just have the A sound of her spliced in, and then I could just type something. And when I hit
active
enter,
voice mimic thing.
yeah, exactly. I have the
Ooh.
whole thing.
You can't steal what doesn't belong to you, bro.
She did sign away her voice to us. I'm pretty sure we made that clear.
Yeah. Her voice and likeness are now property of
Board Game
BGB.
Barrage Inc.
Yeah, Board Game Barrage and all its subsidiaries.
Yeah.
Kidding aside, actually, I do have some bad news because as people who have followed us on the Discord or on Twitter already know, we played Diplomacy a couple weeks ago. And so, fittingly, this is the end. Well, actually, we're talking about the end. This is not the end. It is close to being the end of the show. But actually, we are going to be talking about the end, and specifically the end game. Specifically when you're out of it. A lot of times you're playing games, especially that aren't very swingy, and you know that early on that you're out, and what your responsibilities are, how you should play, and just sort of what you are thinking about when you find yourself maybe in an end game where everybody else is still in their earlier mid game. But before we do that, we have some big news. We have mentioned this on the Discord. And again, if you're looking to get in early on what we're thinking about doing or just talking to us, Discord is a great resource. We mentioned this in the Discord a little while ago, but we have officially launched our Patreon. So this is when I'm going to slice in the cash register sound. So yeah, we are cashing in, finally. Much deserved, in my opinion.
It's about time we sold out.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the selling out was inevitable, and now it is upon us. But no, kidding aside, we are going to really quickly talk about the Patreon page for just a minute. We're not going to be doing this over and over again, but we just wanted to introduce it to you guys for any of those of you who are interested.
Yeah, I think nothing is changing in terms of the weekly podcast. That will always forever be free. Access to our Discord where you can hang out with us. But we were looking for ways to help the podcast expand and also to not run at a net negative, which we have done for the past 75 episodes. So this is just a way for us to recoup some of our server costs, but also maybe advertise the show and hopefully upgrade and do some more things like video content and really just help Board Game Barrage.
So first of all, you can find this at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon, and that's spelled Patreon. I don't know why that is, I guess. I mean, is Patreon like a Greek version of patron?
I don't know. I think it's just like the electronified version
of
Patreon.
Web
Yeah.
3.0.
Like instead of saying e-patron.
Okay, that's something that's... Oh, is that the E?
Oh, I know. That was my assumption.
Oh,
I have no idea.
Because that's always bothered me. So that's where you can find it. So we'll go really quickly through the tiers we've got on offer. So you can be a private in the Board Game Barrage Army at $2 a month.
And it is an army.
It is an
just
army.
To be clear.
Yes, that's right. With that comes, first and foremost, and I'm reading it verbatim here from the site, first and foremost, our extreme gratitude. And that is 100% genuine and authentic. If you're so kind as to contribute through our Patreon, we are grateful at any level, first and foremost.
Thank you, friends.
And also, those at the private $2 a month level will get our quarterly State of the Podcast newsletter. A newsletter we'll be sending via email to anybody at that tier and above, just talking about what we're thinking about doing, what just the state of the podcast in general, what we've got coming up.
Yeah, keep you up to date on any behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on, any upcoming things that we're excited about, and also, have a place where you can send us direct feedback. You'll get that quarterly State of the Podcast email, and then you can provide feedback about the direction you'd like us to go.
Yeah. The next tier, the next rank is Lieutenant. That is at $5 a month. That includes everything mentioned above.
Including the gratitude?
Including the gratitude, yes. The gratitude comes with any tier.
But increasing gratitude.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. The gratitude we send is proportionate to the dollar amount. In addition, you will be getting a bonus monthly episode. So that's something we're going to start doing this upcoming month. And that could be about board games, but probably we're going to be veering off a little bit more on these and just being a little looser and just talking about other aspects of culture or what's going on.
TV shows, films, video games, stuff that we've been doing, stuff that we're excited about that's maybe not exactly in the scope of the regular podcast.
Super loosey-goosey, like a sort of a board game barrage after dark between the sheets.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of times the mics go off, and it's what we end up talking about.
I feel like the mics go off, and then there should be a second part of that. The mics go off, and the something. But never mind. Sorry, go ahead.
And the mics go off, and the shirts go off.
Yes.
No, but the mics go off, and we end up sort of chit-chatting about some other podcast we listen to, something we saw on TV. But there will still be board game discussion. We try to keep our weekly episode to 1 hour or less. And so stuff does hit the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
So there is interesting things going on in some of our minds that you will get to hear at that lieutenant level.
And finally, Patreon has a lens feature that allows us to send sort of like Snapchat-like mini videos randomly. So every once in a while, we'll be sending along those little mini clips of what we're doing and maybe games we're playing or other things we're up to.
When the shirts come off.
That's right.
Shirts will be on for all of Patreon Lens.
Depends on how much you pay. The next tier is the Captain tier at $10 a month. And with that, you get all previous rewards. And again, as Neelan mentioned, our gratitude has now gone up exponentially.
Doubled from the
That's
previous
right.
tier.
That's right. But you also get your own private Board Game Barrage tank color. So you'll join the ranks of Paula, who is officially the Orchid tank, and you'll be able to select your own color tank.
So that will come with a link out on our website. So we'll have a page called The Armory where your tank will be displayed along with your name, as well as a link out to whatever you would like us to link out to. That comes with a private color in the Discord channel where people can see your tank color. And then I'll also be recoloring the tank artwork so that you have an avatar that you can use anywhere you want. It's a bit of a bragging rights thing, but we think it's fun, kind of an exciting way to be even more ingrained in the podcast. There's some really silly colors, so you could be the Shadow Tank or I think Eggnog is a choice. So there's some pretty silly options at that level.
And also you'll be getting a chance to get in on quarterly polls to select a board game that we cover on the podcast. So we'll be putting polls up every couple months, and you'll be able to get in there and vote for games that you want us to play and review.
Yeah, I think that'll be fun, especially because there are games that people keep bringing up on the Discord. So if you really want us to try, PAX Premier 2nd Edition, that is the level to help you do that. Mm-hmm. Except, if you're really into it, at the $100 a month level...
People are clamoring for this, so you got to get in early.
You can become the only true and living fan of the Board Game Barrage podcast. And we will cover any game you want. So you join that level... We are getting that game, and we are playing it, and we're covering it on the podcast.
That's right.
We do want to be clear, this is not intended for publishers to get us to cover their games. This is intended for people who want to hear about Barbie's Mall Dream or some really, really dumb game covered on the podcast. So that is a silly way that you can force us to work for your bidding.
Which we're happy to do.
And also that comes with extreme gratitude.
Like, you can't imagine how much gratitude is going to be coming your way.
We'll be showing up at your door to thank
just
you.
to give you hugs. So that about does it. Again, if you're interested, go to boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon.
This is just another way that you can support the Board Game Barrage podcast. Writing reviews of the show is another amazing way, and telling friends about the show and just recommending it on the internet These are all great ways that you can help the podcast, and we're so grateful for all the support you've given us and hope to just grow this thing in the next year. It's crazy to be at 75 episodes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Though it is ending at the end of this one, right?
Yes, that's
the
right.
last one.
This is the end.
It's not playing Diplomacy that killed it. It's talking about it afterwards.
Right. Yeah. We managed to make it through to talk about it at this episode and no more.
Before we get into talking about the end, let's begin with talking about the games we've played. So, Neelan, what have you been playing?
So, Kellen and I played a little game called Murder on the Cosmic Express. This is a small deck of cards social deduction game.
Even for being a small box.
Yeah, the box is maybe
You open that up and there's nothing
in it. Yeah. So yeah, it's a small assortment of cards, a handful of rolls, as you might imagine in some sort of social deduction role-based game, and then the rest of the cards, and there's only about 14 or 15 of them, are just items, of which there are duplicates. So you might have 3 wrenches, you'll have 3 fire extinguishers, and you might have 2 junk. Now these are the murder weapons, the potential murder weapons that could be, because this is a murder that has happened on the Cosmic Express, which I assume is a space train.
Yeah, this is a train game.
Yeah, exactly.
This is probably based on Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah, I guess so, but with a bizarre space sci-fi twist.
Right.
The funny thing is that they use that bare bones theme, but then the murder weapons are so mundane. It's like, where was my like cosmic spanner or my hyper screwdriver?
Do you know what a spanner is, Kellen?
No.
Excellent.
That's not a real thing.
The spanner is definitely a real thing.
That's another English version.
Wait, do you not say
We do
spanner?
not say
here?
spanner.
It sounds like a
But a
dog
spanner is
breed.
not a wrench.
Wait, what is a spanner?
A spanner is like, well, a wrench is like a type of spanner. I don't know. I'm sort of like betraying that I know nothing about what I'm talking about here. A spanner, I guess, is a type of a wrench. So these are all the murder weapons that you could potentially have. And the way this works is you deal out the roll cards. One person's the murderer. The aim for the murderer is to try get hold of both murder weapons. So one of the murder weapon cards is dealt out face down on the table. The murderer is the only person that gets to look at it, so they know what the murder weapon is. So let's say I'm the murderer. I look at this card, it's the wrench.
Spanner.
The cosmic hyper spanner. Then my aim for the game is to collect both of the remaining 2 wrench cards. There is another player who is the captain. Their role is to try catch the murderer. They do this by having neither of the 2 weapon cards at the end of the game, and by knowing who the murderer is. So then the way that this plays out, once everyone's been assigned a role, and there are a couple of others, like there's someone that's maybe helping the murderer, there's someone that's helping the captain, that sort of thing. The way this plays out is there's a minute-long phase where all you're doing is just trading cards. So it's very loose. You start with 2 cards. You'll always end the game with 2 cards because it's a 1-for-1 trade at all times. And I might just be like, Mark, take this card from me. And you don't know why you want it or whether I don't want it, but then now you've received the fire extinguisher from me and I get the wrench from you. And I might want to hang on to the wrench because in this case, I'm the murderer.
Right.
And I'm trying to pass off my other card to someone else in order to try get both wrenches. This is happening like pretty frantically and fast because it's only a minute long. At the end of that, everyone just either stops trading or hangs onto the cards they have. And the captain then gets to decide whether they know who the murderer is. The first thing that happens is the murder weapon gets revealed. The captain can then use that to deduce who they think was holding onto those murder weapons. And then if they arrest the murderer, the captain wins, as does their potential teammates.
So you are watching literally like where a person is taking a card and playing it, and like if you're the captain and you know it's the wrench and you hand the wrench to somebody, you're watching to see if they are handing it off.
You don't know
The
what
captain
the murder
does
weapon
know,
is.
yeah.
So only the murderer knows what the murder weapon is.
Right,
So
but if
essentially through face down real time trading in a minute, you're trying to discern who the murderer is based on how often they're trading and how interested they are in very specific cards. Because most players are not interested.
Sure.
They only just don't want the murder weapon.
Right.
So what tends to happen is you get to the end phase discussion where it's like, oh, did anyone see a lot of wrenches going around? Because if there were 3 wrenches in the game, you know that wasn't the murder weapon.
Right.
So that's kind of the discussions you're having then. It's like, what did everyone see a lot of? Did anyone like seem to take a card and then just hold onto it for the rest of the game? Because a murderer probably, once they have 2 weapons, wants to just like stop trading, right? So if anyone sort of stops early, that's perhaps a signal that the murderer. And that's kind of the gist of the game. And it's about as loose and silly as it sounds because it's not very good.
Okay. Now, so let me ask, the players who are not the murderer or the captain, why are they trading? Just to gain... Okay.
Good question.
Okay.
It's not very clear why any trading is really happening at length or at speed or with any sort of actual interest. Sort of like I said, like trying to discern what the murder weapon is sort of vaguely and be like, well, I feel like I don't have the murder weapon anymore, so I think I'm okay. It's weird.
I think that there's a smidgen more than Neelan thinks there is in this because, you could trade someone a wrench and then watch them, and so then if the wrench is flipped over as the murder weapon and you're on the captain's team, you say, Captain, I traded a bunch of wrenches to Neelan, and then he didn't trade anymore.
Right.
Or he kept trading forever and ever. So the murderer has to decide the second they get those murder weapons, because they're the only ones with information, so they're likely going to get them as long as everyone is just sort of freewheeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Then it's, do they stop there, or do they trade one away
Hope
so
to
that
get
they
it
can
back.
get it back
Right.
before the end of the round?
And to be clear, I agree with you in theory, but that never happens in practice. We didn't have a game of this where people were intently watching what people were doing with their cards. And I got to be honest, I somewhat enjoyed both my plays of it because I won both rounds. And that was kind of the only reason. And to be
Humble
clear,
brag.
there's probably
Humble brag.
there's probably a fair bit more
Bragger.
strategy there that I'm
know
actually
what brag
letting
is
on,
in
given that I
American, Neelan?
won both times.
It means you're
But-
an arrogant son of a...
But
Were you the murderer in both?
I was the murderer of the second game and the captain the first game. There's funny stuff you can try to do, but only if you're in one of those specific roles, right?
Sure.
Because as the murderer, that thing that Kellen described happened where I get the 2 wrenches and I now have to pretend that I'm still interested in trading, but like sort of just waiting for someone else to stop trading and then go along with it. So, I mean, there are fun little things in there that you could do, but I felt like we were over it after a few games of it.
A positive and a negative. Positive, it takes less than 5 minutes to play.
Yeah, like it's like 3 minutes to play, like literally.
And the captain gets to point at someone and say, I murder you. Or
I
actually, I arrest
No,
you.
the captain's not murdering anyone.
A negative, it has the thing that I hate in social deduction games where there are 5 or 6 different roles and their win condition is a sentence you have to read like 4 times, which is, don't have any of the murder weapons and the murderer is arrested, or have one piece of junk and the murderer is arrested, or no one else wins and then you win. Like, it's annoying, and you almost have to just pass it around each round until everyone is super comfortable with the game.
But you also only really have to know your own role in any given game, which, I mean, I guess that's
Well,
not
to
strictly
add to
true.
the meta,
Right, you're right. You theoretically want to know what
I think it would
everyone's
get
up to.
I do think we could get to a place where there would be more fun social deduction happening.
I
don't
agree
think
with
it's
you.
a good game.
I don't think it's
agree.
worth getting to that point.
But it is like social deduction pit, Mark, right?
I like Pit, but I feel like in Pit you are more driven to make trades.
You're more interested in what you're trading.
Yeah.
I mean, we were making trades, but it was also like 11 p.m. and we were just like, who the hell knows what's
Right.
happening?
So are there any like villager roles?
Sort of. They have like alt win. There's like a
Okay.
butler who is trying to collect junk.
For people who aren't the captain or the murderer, why are they trading?
Yeah,
But
there's
they all
an
have
accomplice who wants to be murdered instead of the murderer. So
Okay.
it's all there.
Yeah.
All of the trappings are there, but it just doesn't seem like there's very much incentive to trade.
Right.
And the rule book, even in its like 4 pages of rules, spends about 3 of them trying to convince you of all the different strategies you could do.
Okay. Okay.
That's about all I have to say about Murder on the Cosmic Express.
There's been a murder on the train game.
I had my first foray into the GIPF series, which is, I think you pronounce it GIPF. I don't know if it's pronounced GIPF. These are a series of abstract, I think exclusively 2-player games. I'm not sure about that. This was my first one in the series, and this was a game I traded for Tamsk, Tamsk. What Tamsk is, that's difficult to say, is sort of a timed area majority game. The board is a series of concentric circles, and each player is given a number of discs, and these discs are placed on the spaces around the circle. So the center circle is this quite high space where 4 discs fit on them. And these discs are sort of like round, hollowed out discs. So 4 of these hollowed out discs can fit in the center circle. 3 can fit around the circles surrounding it. 2 can fit around the circle surrounding that. And then finally, there is a ring of circles on the very edge, and only 1 disc can be placed on any of these circles. Each player is given 3 hourglasses, and these are sort of your pawns in the game. And what you're doing is moving your pawn around the board. Each turn you move 1 pawn, and when you move a pawn from one space to another, you put one of your discs in the space you just vacated. And you can never go to a space that is at its disc limit. So, for example, you start on the edge, and your first move, no matter where it is, you're going to be placing a disc on that space, and that space can no longer be moved to because it has hit its limit. So the center space can be visited 4 times.
Okay, right?
And so the purpose of the game, the winner of the game, is a player who can get rid of more discs. And usually the way that works out is that one player will be in a position where they can no longer move, and the other player can move around a little bit more and get rid of discs. The end game is the person who's got rid of the most discs, but really what you're trying to do is you're trying to tie your opponent up into a situation where they can no longer move. So this game can be played a couple of different ways. One is not taking into account the sand timers. Your hourglasses are just acting as pawns, and you're not using a timed aspect. But the way that we played it is with the timers being part of it. So that adds another layer into the game where every time you move one of your pawns, you're flipping it over. And if you ever get to a situation where one of your hourglasses runs out of sand, that piece is immobilized and can no longer be moved. So this is a very interesting game. What ended up happening in our game was when a player moved one of their pawns and they ended up not having very much time, the other player could sort of stall a little bit and sort of like take a long time on their turn, and then their opponent's piece will be mobilized. For example, Kellen could take an action. It's now my turn, and I could notice that like one of his pieces is almost out of time, and then I could sort of like linger on my move, and then his piece is dead. You have another timer, which is off the board, and it's a 15-second timer that's flipped every single time somebody makes a move, which I think would make the game more fun. But without that timer, it sort of felt like the game was on some level like not broken, but that inactivity leading to a strong play made for sort of like a not great experience.
Didn't feel like the actual intended.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think like this game is made for really quick actions like move, and allowing the player to gain an advantage by not playing just ground the game down. I think this is not really regarded as one of the top GIPF games. If there are anybody out there who has played the GIPF series of games, I would love to know what your rankings are, because it seems like a series that I might be interested in. So let me know either on Discord or email or Twitter. Get at us and let us know how you rank these games. But another thing that is sort of problematic about this game is that the sand timers are wildly different in terms of the amount of sand, like wildly different. This is an older game and I think the rarest of the GIPF games. So I think this was sort of made in a time where production wasn't held to such a high standard. So we had the hourglasses all in a row, and just like the amount of sand from one to the other was like crazy different.
What made you want to pick up this game in the series? Because I know there's a lot of much more popular ones.
Right.
Was it just I'll trade for any of them? Or you were specifically interested in this
That
one?
was part of it. I was just interested in games of the series, and also I got it for, I think, not very much, and it's one of the rarer ones, so I paid like a third of what the actual value is, or a quarter. So that was another part of it. So I think this is going to be one that I'm going to be moving on. But I have heard a lot of great things about this series, and I was hoping this was going to be some gem. But at least without playing with that 15-second timer, it has not been so far. But that was Tamsk, Tamsk, part of the GIPF GIPF series of games. Kellen, what did you play? What did we play?
To celebrate the birth of this great country on the 4th of July, we played a game of diplomacy.
Yep.
A game that we have been talking about for a very long time. Specifically, we played a small variant of Diplomacy, Diplomacy 1900. Huge special thanks to VRYC from the Discord. I do not know how to say your username. Super helpful in getting this variant set up. It's essentially Diplomacy, but the map has changed a little bit to help prevent some of the stalemates and to try to balance out some of the win rates of the various countries participating in the game. Diplomacy is a game that has existed for more than 40 years. It is a cutthroat negotiation bluffing game where you are spending time away from the table, making deals, playing Survivor essentially, and then coming back to the table and writing all your orders down and then turning them over all at once, and everything happens all at once. This may sound incredibly complicated, a la Risk with a ton of units, but actually you can only ever have one unit in each region or each territory. And if you try to move one unit to another region that belongs to Neelan or Mark, that bounces off and nothing will happen because every unit in the game is worth the same amount of power. Well, where the game is, where the fun is that each unit can support, instead of moving, a unit can support another unit. So if I can convince Mark to support my movement into Neelan's territory, suddenly that's 2 versus 1, and Neelan has to retreat, and I have increased my territory. In this game of Diplomacy, I played the Turkish people. I was Turkey. Neelan was France, and Mark was
Austria-Hungary. I had the name of two countries, but the power of a half of a country.
So this game got started at about 3 p.m. on a Saturday and did not end until well after midnight.
Well, it didn't end for some of us till well after midnight. Ended for some of us well before midnight.
Diplomacy contains player elimination.
Yes, it does.
But diplomacy is also known as the friendship killer. And that is why we've been joking about, the podcast being over now.
Joking, in quotations.
The game does, and I've talked about it's in my top 50 of all time. The game does paranoia. The game does this, why is that person talking to this person, and what am I going to do about it? And it makes people mad at each other. I think my thoughts on diplomacy are well known. How did you guys feel about diplomacy?
I should probably start.
Yeah, go for it.
So I had a very strange game of diplomacy. Maybe not strange, because player elimination is part and parcel with the game, and I was player eliminated. I think I was the only player eliminated, right?
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So
Out of 7.
What? Out of 7, yes.
So that's 7th of 7.
Yes, I was 7th of 7, which became clear to me that I'd be 7th of 7 in turn 3. I was pretty sure about that. I didn't play this game well. I played way too aggressive, way too early, I felt, in retrospect. I was thinking about this game after we left, or after I left, which was, again, much earlier than anybody else involved. I feel like this was my best, worst experience in a game. Not ever, but it felt like my best, worst board game experience. Like, I left about 6 or 7 hours into this game. I was out of first place, I thought, maybe 3 hours into it, maybe a little bit less than that, maybe a little earlier than that. But at that point, my only tension was making sure that I wasn't, and we'll get more into this when we get into our main discussion, that I wasn't going to ruin the game for anybody else.
So let's start with what led to your demise.
Yes. So what led to
I'm smiling. You can't see that on the...
What led to my demise was the nation I played is sort of centralized. It was sort of surrounded on all sides. And I was very blustery early on, saying that I was going to be making a play for a contested region, which was Switzerland. And that sort of put a target on me, I think. And also, Austria-Hungary has the fewest control points, which is what allows you to gain armies. It has 3. And so...
There are a few other countries with 3.
Like who?
So Austria-Hungary had 3. Turkey only had 3. Italy only had 3. So yeah, there were a couple others.
Okay, so there are a couple others.
I'm
but
not trying to.
No, that's fine. I don't mind. Austria-Hungary is one of the ones that has 3. It's going to either be 3 or 4 to start the game. But when I didn't get Switzerland, then there are 3 control points that are sort of in between Russia, who's played by Kellen's brother, Turkey, which was played by Kellen, and Austria-Hungary. There's 3 control points that are sort of like right in between these. And we made an alliance early on to share these, to have one apiece. The problem was that Kellen was able to get the Egyptian control point, which starts with Britain but is near Turkey. And Paxton was able to get control points with Russia up north. And I really had no other places to get control points. I was locked out of getting control points. So at that point, I felt like I was only treading water at best. And so I needed to get a control point. So I basically demanded from my partners at the time to get a control point. The way I had it in my head was I thought this would be a way to strengthen, like I was clearly the one who was not going to have a chance to get a control point anyplace else. So I was trying to present it as I need to get a control point from one of you guys or I'm dead. So like, let's strengthen all of us. But the way they took it, and I get it, is that I was like threatening them to like either give me a control point or
else.
Yeah, exactly.
Or else.
Which is fine. I get that completely.
I think it's funny coming from the other perspective of that. You always need an outlet of where you can go. Where can you expand? And I had the opportunity to expand into Egypt and across to the mid-Atlantic. Russia was expanding out in Norway and Sweden and up north. And you were kind of compacted right there in the middle.
Right. And also, I didn't start with any fleets. So then that also cut me off from going south and going into North Africa. So I just felt like at best treading water. So I had to make a move. And so I tried to make a move. It failed. And then I was done. I was basically clearly done.
And what I recall of that, because I was definitely separated from you by a couple of countries, but the earliest discussions that happen in this game are where are we each respectively going to expand into, right? And we all had this idea. In fact, the earliest discussions I remember having from like a countering other players at the table perspective was Mark looks like he's going for Switzerland. So myself, Christina, and Brandon in this case were all like, okay, how do we stop Mark from taking Switzerland? So you were like immediately counted from your only real core early goal.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I was trying to be aggressive, like spicy from the very beginning, making that proclamation like I'm coming in for Switzerland. Right. And that was a mistake. I should not have been doing that without having any real idea of how I was going to do it. I was just trying to like stir the pot from the get-go.
Yeah, it felt not, and I won't say a poor move, but it felt, you know that you're going to get betrayed in this game. You know that when the orders get flipped, something that you wanted to happen is not going to happen from your ally. But basically every 2 turns, every 2 orders that you write down, sets of orders, is when the control points are scored. So you have one turn where there's less at stake, and then in the next turn, there's more at stake. And so to be so early on in the game of diplomacy, and obviously it's your first game, you can't know otherwise, you're trying to figure out what borders you can say, I don't have to pay attention to that, because you can't pay attention to everything. And you know that eventually you'll get betrayed. I knew that Russia, Paxton would eventually betray me. It was just a matter of time. And so we had made that alliance, that strong, here, one for each of us. This gives us a common core. And then with about 4 minutes left in the negotiation of a fall turn was when you announced to us.
I think it was much earlier than that.
Maybe it was. Yeah, but my perception of what happened is we all expanded out. We all figured out what the hell we were going to do. And then right before it was time to count stars, you're like, hey guys, by the way, I'm about to take a star from you or else. Like, give me this star or else. And Paxton and I both looked at each other like, why is he telling us he's doing this?
Right.
And so immediately we looked at the map and realized that we could just take you out and cut you out of it above the table.
Right.
And so that kind of makes sense why you would actually come to us, because you were trying to be not nefarious. You're trying to be honest and open. But because of the time, and I think that's one of the very interesting things about diplomacy, because of the ticking time that's counting down, I was just like, Mark, I feel like you're coming to me in the 11th hour and saying, do this or else. And I'm like, we could have sorted this out a year ago and figured out where you could go. And then I would help you because we're in an alliance.
Right.
But you're like, I need a star and I'm taking it from my alliance. It just did not compute.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's not my recollection of how it went. I thought it was much earlier, and I don't think I ever said that I was going to take it from you guys. I was wanting you to seed it, but whatever. I mean, believe me, I'm not going to argue that I played the game correctly at all. But yeah, so for me, I knew very early on that I probably wasn't going to win, and then there was a point, again, quite early where I knew I was out. Like, I knew that there was no chance of me gaining any ground. So at that point, again, my only concern is like, I don't want to ruin the game for anybody else, but otherwise there was no pressure on me. I got the sense that Christina was playing as England, and she said a couple times, like, this is the most nervous I've been playing game, or she said something along those lines. And I was like, I feel no tension at all. Like, I'm done. Like, I was trying to improve my position as much as possible and trying to make alliance for some swing, but there was no chance with playing with competent players that I was going to be back into it. So I'm like, okay, let me see how much damage I can do. Let's see if I can have some sort of influence, but without ruining the experience for anybody else. So basically amounted to a couple hours of me sitting there, honestly, frankly, doing other things, like doing work emails and taking care of other things, because I was out. Yeah, I don't know what to think of the game, honestly. I would play it again, but I can't honestly say that my hopes for the game weren't hurt. My impression of the game wasn't hurt by my experience, but I'm also willing to understand that a large part of that was probably because of how it went for me.
My recollection of it was certainly more positive. I feel like I had one of the most quote-unquote interesting arcs in the game, despite not playing especially well, in that I sort of established a fair amount of power early on and was seen as the most threatening player at the table. And Kellen, this is something Kellen does very, very well. Kellen is very quick to point out when that happens and turn the entire table. against you.
You got so screwed.
It was pretty spectacular because I went from being extremely dominant, literally dominating the entire southwest corner of the map, to having 4 people turn on me all at once and like wrecking me. So I went basically from first to last in the space of a single year. It was disappointing and it's tragic, but it was fun. That's the game. I was trying these last minute sort of appeals to my allies at that point, but it doesn't work out. Kellen's already got inside their ear and twisted their minds against me. And what ends up happening is that Kellen starts to walk over the map, which is his way. It was a fun experience. And I think my biggest issues with the game actually tend to be on the more mechanical side of it. There is I don't want to say complexity, but there is a process to the resolution phase of this that is not super easy to parse out without actually working through it in quite a meticulous fashion. So you might think you know what's going to happen by the time you've sent in your orders, but then, this resolved this in this order, therefore this bounces back, and therefore the map is actually fundamentally different from how I thought it was going to be. And that's interesting because it's actually almost like watching a little clockwork world work its way out based on all these decisions that everyone's made simultaneously, but it also just it lends itself to situations where you can't exactly know what you're going to get out at the end of a year, despite what you thought you were putting in. And that's my chief complaint. I also obviously don't think the game should run as long as it did for us, and I don't think it would on a subsequent play of it. We could certainly reduce the timers, get everyone going quicker, and I would be willing to go for it under those circumstances again, happily.
I want to point out what an interesting and not, it doesn't happen often where I have significantly more experience than either of you with the game because we usually are playing them together.
Right.
One turn specifically, Nealon, immediately as soon as the timer started for the 15 minutes, he said, "Italy, let's go talk." And Italy and France went outside and talked for like 7 or 8 of the 15 minutes. And I just sat and looked at the board and said, well, there's only one real pain point. There's one position that they're talking about because that's the only thing they could be talking about right now. And I was able to let all other players at the table know what they were likely talking about. And then when Nealon came back, I was able to convince Italy that what Nealon had been talking about was not helpful for him and to swing it. And so I think that that's a weird thing that diplomacy does, is that it's not just like that real-time nature of who you're talking to and when you're talking to them is actually a mechanism of the game.
Right.
And what I would say is that because I know the system better than both of you, because I can just internalize that better, I was able to pay attention to the softer things or the things on the periphery while other people are still trying to sort of just figure out what the hell am I even doing?
Right, exactly. It did feel like a lot of the mental maths, as it were, in that first game for everyone at the table, except presumably you and I believe Paxton had played it a couple of times before, was, what is going to happen if I do this? Like, how do I actually accomplish the things I want to do? And a lot of the nuance, which was stuff that we sort of came to be aware of over the course of, frankly, of just watching you play, because there was this fantastic moment where you sort of somehow managed to like work there was this little triangle around like Egypt and Italy that was contentious between you, myself, and Italy. And you sort of somehow managed to work in 2 directions at once in a way that was pretty great to watch. And those sort of like subtleties are something that would probably only come to other players after the second or third time playing it. That's the stuff I'm excited to get to, because everything else around the discussion of it was one of the best experiences I've had. Like, taking someone aside and being like, okay, we're going to this other side of the room, or suddenly people are on my porch, people are sort of like huddling in the laundry room. It's weird. People are just sort of gathering in these small little sort of secret meetings all throughout the apartment, and it's fun.
Was it you who, at one point, I was leaning my head out of the room to listen to another conversation, and then someone walked out and they're like, "Are you allowed to do that?"
Oh, yes. Right.
And I'm like, yeah, absolutely you're allowed to do that. You can just walk up to them and not let them get out of your earshot. So I was like literally in one room looking at the map, kind of like tilting my head just to listen in on what else was going on. I think the next game we do should be online.
Right.
If we could organize this with the Discord, it would be relatively straightforward. It would be paranoia-inducing and super great. I do want to just point out, as our last point on diplomacy here, is that we didn't even finish this game in the way that one should finish a game of diplomacy. Almost 50% of diplomacy games end in stalemate. That's just a factoid. I think this 1900 map is better. We ended up calling it at about 12:30 that night, deciding that we were going to vote. Everyone left in the game voted on who they thought should win, which was hilarious, but not how the game tells you to play. Tournament rules sometimes say you'll play this many turns, and whoever controls the most control points wins. but that's also finicky because you could go big on one turn, but then you'd be set up to lose on a subsequent turn. So there is some trouble with the end game. Most people know that going in. The way we did it was we literally imitated the show Survivor and had people give speeches, and the jury asked us questions about how we'd perform.
Right. Left the room to privately discuss and come back.
And just, hashtag I won the game. So you're welcome, guys, for that first Diplo experience. I had a great time. I appreciate everyone who played with us, and it's a crazy one, man. It's such a weird thing.
Definitely. So that talk of diplomacy and it's sort of finicky endgame leads us nicely into our main discussion, which is what happens if you're in, say, my position, and you find yourself in a situation where you're not going to win, but there's still a lot of game ahead of you. What are your responsibilities? Just how should you handle your position at that point? So as I sort of mentioned, what I did was try to maintain the integrity of the game. It's interesting because when it came to me actually being eliminated, I could have played my last turn in a way to survive another round. I would have been limping one more round, which would have committed me to another full 2 turns. And I felt bad about, in my heart, what I wanted to do was to just get eliminated. But I was worried that I was going to mess up the integrity of the game. So I asked everybody, I said, hey, would anybody mind if I took the suboptimal move here, which would have eliminated me, instead of taking the optimal move and survive one more round? And I just wanted to make sure that everybody was okay with me taking the suboptimal move to get eliminated. I didn't really think it was going to affect the game, but if anybody had said anything, if anybody had any strong opinions about wanting me to stay, I would have stayed, but I'm glad they didn't. But that's just sort of where I sort of took diplomacy and my position in it for that game. I know you guys played a game of El Grande.
Yeah, so the reason that this topic sort of had resurged in something I was thinking about actively, it was that Kellen and I recently played another game of El Grande, and this became a pretty prominent discussion over the course of the game, where one player came to a fairly early lead and was able to maintain it for the majority of the game after Kellen, in this case, had dropped to what was basically the last position or close to last with 1 or 2 other players. And the discussion became like, okay, if I am now in the position where we're close enough to the end of the game and I know I cannot win, like the gap is just too large to close, what should I be trying to do? And I think the first question that crosses people's minds in this situation is the idea of kingmaking. We've spoken about that a lot in the past, so I don't want to make this about that, but it's more about what is your incentive as the last player? What should you be aiming for? Is this about acquiring as many points as possible? In a game like El Grande, you are still scoring victory points ultimately, or should you just be trying to advance your rank? If you're in 5th place, should you be chasing 4th? Should you be chasing 3rd? Should you still be trying to win, even though there's this unspoken agreement that you probably can't?
Right.
Like that's kind of the genesis of this discussion for me, and where it gets kind of almost like, again, philosophical. Like, what is your intent when you're playing a game?
So I think, Mark, and we didn't talk about this, but I was talking to Christina about it after our game of diplomacy, is there was a couple of hours after you were out, but still in it, where I said, hey, let's go talk. And we went outside and talked, and we talked about the game.
Yeah.
And I positioned it to you as like, said, hey, what do you want to accomplish? Right? Because let's see if I can help you do something in the game. Obviously, I was trying to prevent you from using your last little sword to attack me.
Right.
But also, I sort of felt like I saw a little light in your eyes, like someone cares about me, and I'm joking, but not joking. And I know that like where it's like, you have some exertion on the game, and I was saying, how do you want to use that? And you were actually thinking about it, and who could you hurt? And so for me, what you do in diplomacy is who betrayed you the most, and how can I cut off as much of their head as possible, even though it's not much, make them bleed a little bit. And so I was surprised, actually, that there wasn't more hit back from you. I know you started working with Dan and sort of trying to suss out what you could do, but it did not seem like there was like that want for retaliation like I probably would have done.
In that situation, in a game like that, if that game had been a shorter game and I had been dead last, I would have felt more incentive to jockey for maybe a spot up or 2. But I was so out of it to such an early extent that wasn't a thing. So I just was trying to maintain a situation where my being there wasn't going to affect the end game. Like, I wasn't disabling anybody. Like, if I could have been vengeful, I would have, but I couldn't, so I wasn't. how would you have played my position
So
when it evolved?
yeah, I think that it's obviously clear that player elimination in super long games sucks, and that in a Euro game, the game should end once someone has really won. The game design should try to do that, but diplomacy is its own specific, unique beast. So for me, I've heard of groups that they actually do something where you join someone else's team once you're out of it. So like once you've actually lost, you just become sort of a serf or a hand to another nation that you were trying to help, and you become incentivized to help that nation. I know, we got down to the end game. Neelan was upset with me.
Yeah.
And he was not going to win because he had been batted down. And Christina was my biggest competition. So Neelan was effectively in the game, but probably wasn't going to win the game, and was sort of talking about basically taking on a role as like Christina's watchdog, and not in a bad
I don't think it was ever that
way.
explicit, because like Christina and I were pretty contentious for most of the game. But for me specifically, it was like my discussion with Christina was, look, my only aim in this game is like Kellen's coming at me, I'm just going to fight back against Kellen. I need you to help me fight back against it, because I was a little bit like cornered by Christina to some extent. So yeah, it never became so much about helping Christina so much as hurting you, to be honest.
But in a way that his win condition for himself sort of changed a little bit, and not in a way that feels like it's in the spirit of what diplomacy is.
Sure, yeah.
So in the event that I was you, I would try to use whatever exertion that I could, and once it was clear I couldn't, I probably would have tried to kill myself quicker than you did. I think you tried to do the noble thing because you didn't want to abandon, one or two little star symbols that someone was going to gobble up, but I probably would have just...
Would you have declared to the table like, "Hey, would you have made it like
probably? Yeah. I would have just said, "Hey guys, like I tried to hurt Paxton as much as I possibly could for scumbagging me, and I can't, so I'm going to be trying to kill myself now."
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, but I don't know, and that would have saved you, 2 hours of time, which is totally fair, but that's so specific to diplomacy. And then if you get onto the Euro end of the equation, becomes maybe a different conversation about maximizing points. El Grande has a lot of direct player interaction, and so you could once again still be just trying to hurt someone, and I think that that's fair if they've been bullying you that game.
Right.
If you get meta and go outside the game, then that seems really unfair. Mark always wins, so I'm going to hurt him now. Like that would feel outside the spirit of that to me. But the interesting thing about our El Grande discussion is, how do you answer this question, right? If you're in fourth place, are you playing to get into third place, or are you playing to maximize your points? Because those aren't always the same thing. So how would you answer that question?
I think it depends on what you are aiming for. We talked before the podcast about people who log their games on like a stat app.
Those people.
Who are those
very
people?
cool people who do that? And so there might be an argument to be made for somebody like that who says like, I didn't win the game, but I scored more points this game than my last game. And so I think that if somebody is playing with that intent to score more points, there's not much argument that you can make against it, like as a legitimate.
Well, there's actually a third, and I just remembered, is you could just say, I'm playing to win, or there's a winner, and then there's nothing else.
Right.
And, in El Grande, there's specific targeted attacks. Like, this gets me 5 points and loses that player 3 points. And so you're saying that any one of those things is valid depending on who you are.
Right, depending on your genuine intent. Like if your genuine intent is to try to, if you're a person who's like win or die sort of mentality, then I feel like it's totally legitimate for you to be like, all I'm doing is I'm quote unquote bashing the leader, but I'm honestly doing that because I'm trying to do my best to win. Mm-hmm. And then the third way would be like a relativistic approach where like I am now looking not maybe to maximize my points, but to maximize my standing. So therefore, if I'm in fifth place, I am going to be attacking the fourth place player to try to overtake them.
Right.
Depending on like sort of game state and where you are in the game.
Right. Well, like also like I had a very specific instance of this in my game of El Grande where I did an action that's like, okay, I'm going to score this territory and that gets me 6 points. And someone points out, well, you could score this one and get 9 points. But then the consequence of that is then Christina, who is my next person up the rankings for me, is also scoring points. So it doesn't actually close the gap as much as the 6-0 option.
Right.
And it's like, to me, that felt like the most important thing. Like, I don't think I could catch up to the lead, but I want to try get second place.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. Like Kellen said, that may not even be a consideration for some people. Like, it's either first or nothing as far as a lot of people are concerned.
Yeah, so I'll rank it, and maybe you guys can crystallize a little bit. So for me, if there's even a 5% chance that I could win the game, I will go big for broke.
100%.
So I
Yeah.
start doing crazier strategies. It's hard to know when you've crossed past that I have a 5% chance of winning. Following that, I will 100% be playing for the place, for the ranking, and not the points. So the last option for me would be playing to maximize my score. I feel like in almost all games, there's so much differential. El Grande, for example, some cards don't come out some games, and therefore the scores are going to be lower or higher based on which cards come out. So that doesn't, to me, feels like the least in the spirit of what a game of El Grande is trying to do, which is to get you to fight with everyone for dominance over the board. I think that Archipelago is obviously the example here where is there a winner among winners, or is there one winner and a bunch of losers? I personally believe the ranking is at least important, and some games I believe would devolve if people aren't trying to win. If you're fifth place and you're out and you go, LOL, I'm just going to do whatever I want,
Right.
you can really hurt the game state, which I think is what you were trying to prevent
Right.
from happening in,
Yeah.
in our game of Diplo.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Like, for me, if I have any chance of winning, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll take big swings to try to do that. And then, yeah, even though I do keep track of points scored, I mean, that's really just sort of a bookkeeping thing. I really have no interest. I'd much rather finish in second place and score 100 points lower in a game than have a higher score and finish in last. So for me, it's number one, do whatever it takes to win, and then try to finish as high as possible.
Absolutely agree. And it's funny, I just want to reiterate what you were saying with the scoring thing. As someone that also has been tricked into logging and scoring every single game, I don't care about the
Yeah.
scores. Like, theoretically, you play multiple games, you could, check your scores against previous sessions. I've not once cared after the end of the game.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I care about the games I've won, lost, and I sort of, even like thinking back to the yesterday's game of El Grande, I'm thinking like, oh, what could I have done to get second instead of first? But my score is meaningless.
Yeah. For me, my trying to finish as high as possible is a function of me trying not to mess up the game. Because really, for me, if I don't finish in first, I don't really care. Like, honestly, second doesn't really, I don't care about second, I don't care about third. At that point, when I'm out of first, all I'm trying to do is not mess up the game for anybody else. And I think the best way to do that is to try to finish as high as possible. But really, I have no interest in, like, I don't care about finishing second. Doesn't matter to me. Internally, like, in my heart, I don't care about it. Doesn't matter. It's like first, or I make sure everybody else has a good time.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that it really is more about preserving the game state than it is about, because you want to be the winner and you're not. Second place is not a winner.
Right, exactly.
Just to be clear, that is a hot take from the entire Board Game Barrage crew,
Yes.
including the Orchid Tank. Yes, Callan?
That's a perfect Paula. Yeah. I'll add that to the soundboard. So that's going to do it for our discussion of the end game. Let us know what you think about it, how you handle games where you're out prematurely. Are you jockeying? Are you genuinely fighting for second place? Is that something that drives you? Or are you trying to improve your score and maybe your skill at the game? I mean, what do you do when you're out of it? And I wish you would have told me this a couple weeks ago when we played Diplomacy, because I would have used your advice. But before we go, we are going to read a review. This is a Facebook review. And it comes from the one and only Erland, a uniquely spelled first name, Erlend. That's cool. Erland. Sounds like a nation. Erland. I come from Erland.
Yep.
Nobody's backing me on this.
An
And
Earl of Land.
Erland says, a sweet South African introvert. That's you, Neelan.
That's me. Oh, that's me.
A homeless hoarder.
That's alliteration.
That's probably me. And a mean businessman.
What?
You're the mean businessman.
I'm a businessman?
Yeah, you're a mean businessman specifically. A sweet South African introvert, a homeless hoarder, and a mean businessman discuss board games.
That's our new tagline, our new slogan at the beginning of every episode.
Print that on the shirt.
Yeah.
I love these guys, and the podcast is great. Looking forward to every episode. Great chemistry between the host and perfect balance of banter and game talk. Go, I want to say, the Blue Tank. So he is gone off the reservation and is a Blue Tank fan, which is something we do not endorse, but to each their own.
That would be such a fantastic shirt.
What?
Just all of that, like, listed on.
As
like,
the person referenced as a homeless hoarder, I'm going to say that might not be a fantastic shirt. I'm going to say that I will nix the homeless hoarder reference on our upcoming shirts. But I don't know. If I'm overruled, I'm overruled.
yeah, yours will have, like, a gym.
I could be like Linus in the Peanuts. Like, he has like that dirt cloud.
Are we thinking like each of us has our own individualized shirt. Like mine just says "Sweet South African Introvert" on it.
I'm not gonna have
Yours
a shirt
just
that
says "Homeless Hoarder" on the back.
I'm not going to walk around with a homeless hoarder T-shirt.
I just like the
I'm
idea
sorry, Erlen. I love you, but I'm not doing it.
of the 3 tank colors, and then it just this sentence, and it doesn't even say what it is. It's just like blank, blank, blank. Talk board games, and then someone reads it and is like, "What the does that mean?"
So yes, thank you, Erland, I think, for that review. Please feel free to review us on Facebook or Apple Podcasts or wherever you find us. We love seeing those, and we are eager to read them. So see, I was referenced as a homeless hoarder, and yet we read the review, so that proves that we are not above reading anything. So that's going to do it for the show. As always, you can find us at BoardGameBarrage.com. You can find our new Patreon at BoardGameBarrage.com/Patreon. So take a look at those tiers, and
We'll put a button on the site as well for you to click on as well if you just go to the homepage.
yeah, you can find us on all forms of social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. We're everywhere you want to be, which has been added recently to the show Bible.
Yes. We will be at Gen Con 2019
Gen Con 2019.
and Shucks 2019 if you want to hang out with us, because you can't get a homeless hoarder where you are from.
Yeah, if you've got a home that I can hoard in Indianapolis, let
That
us
is
know.
true. That is a little hard to hold in your mind at once. The
Yeah.
homeless.
All right.
What are you hoarding?
Right. Yeah.
Board games.
That's right. That's right. And so tune in for next week's episode, which will be a Gen Con 2019 preview, which we're excited to do. I know Kellen loves the Gen Con preview part of BGG.
I just love your voice.
That's true. Fair. And that's going to do it for the show. Thanks as always to Heart Society for the intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? And we will see you guys next week for the big preview. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for the support, everybody.
Love it.
I got to figure out what my...
How you bash yourself in there. Yeah.
Yeah, just come in hard and...
Just scream.
I don't... I'm actually uncomfortable. Scream right now.
Ah!
Holy
No.
shit.
Oh, I like
Let's see. Where we probably don't want to start there. Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh no.
Ah!